Hey everybody, welcome back to season 2 of Selling Circular. It's been a little bit. That is, we're all busy. We're all trying to figure things out, and Sabir and I do this show for the love about having circular conversations, and we had things going on, both personally and professionally. You're in Vancouver, so you're just traveling, and we're all doing cool things. So,
Traveling. Yeah.
yeah, we're trying to figure things out. So, thank you for joining us again. Again, my name is Gar Punnett. I'm the CEO and founder of Loop Layer, and we're trying to reimagine the remanufacturing economy, trying to figure out how do we build the systems that make product take back systems all the better. Sabira Lakhani, as always, tell them about you.
I'm Sabira, currently Senior Director of Product at Reaply, where we are building marketplaces and technology to make reuse easier than throwing stuff out.
That is always the problem, is how easy it is to throw things out. That is actually can lead us into, we're going to do a couple new sort of segment stuff. We want to teach each other some things. We want to focus on learning new things and trying to get out of maybe some preconceived notions about circular economy. I actually mentioned in our guest coming up that we're in circular economy 1.0, and now we get to have more conversations that get to expand our understanding. We get to posturize, theorize, just talk about having cool conversations. So we're going to do a little segment where we're going to teach each other different things in different episodes. I'm going to start it off this week, and then Sabira can continue that in the next one, and then we'll just go from there. Everybody, you get how this will go. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some of these ideas, and then the episode, and then we'll jump into the episodes with some of these great new hosts or new round of entrepreneurs this season. So thank you, everybody. We'll start it off here, Sabira, with this learning segment,
Cool.
which I read this paper. It was from 1971, titled "The Next Industrial Revolution." The author, I might butcher this, but Athelstan Spielhaus. You ever heard of Athelstan, Dr. Spielhaus?
No, sounds
South
right. Sounds
African
like a
doctor.
fiction.
Yeah,
Sounds
it does, right?
fictional, actually.
His
Yeah.
name's South
Yeah.
African, so no offense to
Yeah.
the South Africans out there, but yeah, they might have some names that we haven't heard before, at least in the U.S. But it does. It sounds fictional. Doctor from South Africa actually came to the U.S. to teach, if I remember from my research, which I'm doing from memory, people, so please don't crucify me too much. Which is, he came to the U.S. and started teaching at the University of Minnesota. I can talk a little bit about the work that he was doing, because there were some new, very cool community building, next level. Well, how do we reimagine communities? And you'll get a sense of that out of this paper that I want to read some excerpts to you and get a reaction out of. So this paper, again,
Already, yeah,
titled
I'm intrigued. Sorry
good.
to interrupt.
No, this is good.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
reimagining communities. That's great.
Yes. And so, titled "The Next Industrial Revolution," the first excerpt that I want to read is, he's essentially talking about what it's going to take for the next industrial revolution to happen. And he says, the object of the next industrial revolution is to ensure that there will be no such thing as waste, on the basis that waste is simply some substance that we have not found the wit yet to use. So really, we haven't figured it out. It continues. The industry and business, what some call the private sector, have been asked to do their job. They are to perform magnificent feats of scientific, technological, and managerial skills to take things from the land, or to grow them in the land, refine them, mass manufacture, mass market, and mass distribute them in order to serve the so-called consumer, who is nothing but a user. So I love that. So my reaction, why I love your reaction, is he's essentially saying we go through all of this magnificent work to turn these raw materials, these hunks of materials that we pull out of the earth, and turn them into the goods we use. And then we expect almost very little on the other end of that process.
Yeah, it's like a one-sided, it feels like a one-sided relationship. Like, as you were reading that, and I can imagine him talking, it feels like the weight of the work is being done by industry, and the consumer is kind of just like Meh. Yeah.
To then follow that, which is to the met of it, the same mass of material is then left to the public sector, so the consumers, and it's left to the public sector to then figure out how to dispose. So
Yeah.
by and large, he says, in our society, the private sector makes the things before use, and then for the use, it offsets essentially the job of the public sector to dispose of them after that use. Now, what I find very interesting in
Yeah.
that is he's writing this in 1971, in which the privatization of the mass movement of waste has not been fully realized. So you probably still had a lot of public systems that were performing these, and it wasn't waste management yet. It wasn't. I think waste management actually just gone private, but going private back in those days was very different. Or just gone public. Sorry, and going public was very different. But it was just a new company back then, and so this idea that you're privatizing the waste industry and that the waste industry was now a reaction to the manufacturing of the private industry, the private sector of manufacturing, it was a fascinating new problem. So he's looking at this, not necessarily seeing the future of what was going to happen in our waste industries.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think the public sector nature of that is, like he's not explicitly saying this, but there's two parts to that I think. One is the public is kind of left holding the bag, and the public includes the private sector also, and the consumer, and the government. It includes everybody, but there's like a certain representation in the public sector. So like, I guess what I'm saying is like the impact impacts all people, but there's a subset of humans that have to
Yes.
deal with that problem, and that subset representing everybody tends to be slower than the private sector. That's how it's been for the last. It depends on the industry or whatever, but
I love your point, which is, again, I swear, people, I'm giving this to her and you're reacting in live. The next point that he says is now addressing kind of what you're saying. So it's like, and so it's interesting in contrasting that, which is you're saying there's a subset of people who aren't involved with the making of the thing. They're maybe only using it, but now they're actually dealing with maybe a burden of it. And that's because what he says too is in the early days, people in the earlier days, I guess he says, people were willing to put up with the side effects because they wanted the power. They wanted things for their homes and the abundance of food. But as an industry and agriculture providing them these things in full supply, they take them for granted. Their aspirations are raised, and it is only in recent years that people as a whole have expressed a new desire for both the things that they want and the clean environment. And so now he's talking about that reaction where you're talking about that subset where they're saying, hey, actually, we would like these things, but also there's a new want, a new desire where we need things to be cleaned up. And so just to remind our audience too of where the US was in 1971 when this is written, or at least published, is we were dealing with a much dirtier country. We were dealing with a country that was had a lot more litter. This was the advent of no littering campaigns and no litter laws. And so it was very commonplace for people to throw things away. And we were starting to see highways. We were starting to see parks just covered in our refuse.
garbage. Yeah.
Again, this calls back the famous scene in Mad Men. Do you remember the scene that I'm talking about? Have you ever seen it?
I'm not sure I have.
It's this famous scene with Don Draper where he's out with his family, and it's kind of a callback to a different also advertisement in which they're out having a picnic, and he sort of famously shakes the blanket of all the trash that's on the blanket just to let it get off the blanket, wraps up the blanket, leaves the trash in the grass, and then packs up the family in the car. It's either Don or his wife, actually, I can't remember, but it's kind of a famous scene because that's what it was like, is people were just letting that be.
Yeah. You know what's fascinating about like what I was feeling while you were reading that was
Yeah.
we have, as a society, the industrialization of how we operate has basically like taken the wonder away from the world. Like we get to have blueberries in off-season time. We get to have laptops and TV. We get to have medical equipment. I went to my OBGYN the other day. What the ultrasounds? Like what? I can see my
just
organs
taking a look
inside of my
inside you.
body.
Yes.
My mind was just like hurting with this is like possible. And this is like, I'm talking about like the small fraction of stuff that, you know, there's way more stuff out there in the world that I haven't seen that's way cooler than that, right? So
And the scary part is there's way more stuff that we haven't been told that we can actually do.
right.
And there's
Exactly.
so there's also that end. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's I think the litter problem and like just like our relationship with the environment actually has something to do with the like we've almost been robbed of our ability to be awed or surprised by nature and the
Yep.
world, because you're born into there's all these things that already exist, you know, like there's no chance to discover like, oh, there's something cool and new out there.
I love that you brought that up. It's something that I think about regularly, which is, and I tell this to, you know, we every once in a while we get a chance to talk to maybe some entrepreneurs, or we talk to classes about circular economy, or talk to just open minds who are willing to learn from at least some of our experiences in the field, which I'm always so grateful for. The one thing I do say in that is don't take all the rules that have been written before you and the things that have been done for granted. These things can be rewritten. And that's kind of maybe even the point that he's saying, which is we're sort of making this up. And so kind of your point, there's so many cool tech, there's so many cool things that we can do, but it doesn't have to be, and we can build new systems now to address the flow of waste. And so ultimately that's where he's going, where there's actually an idea that he put forward that I'd love to read, which is he essentially this idea that what if we ended up, and I'm going to summarize it because it's a little long, so I'm going to summarize this portion, which is we've talked about this idea, but the fact that I saw it written for the first time here, he talks about what it would be if we just actually spent money on aggregating material. Not that we would need to know how to do anything with it, but he's like, what if we didn't know how to process cars and we just created a car mountain? And if we just put all the cars at Car Mountain, eventually our processes and our understanding of how to process Car Mountain, we could go mine Car Mountain.
Yeah.
And to some degree, you and I have heard that in the industry where it's this pursuit that we've seen where different machines, different processes, where we eventually, hopefully, will go mine landfills. That we'll go figure that out, and we'll go start to dig up all that stuff and be able to chemically process, mechanically process those types of mountains. But at least here he's saying, hey, let's separate it first. Let's get all the car doors. I'm paraphrasing here on the types, but let's get all the metals out here to this giant mountain, and we can figure out how to process that metal car door mountain when we have the technology.
Yeah, I think that's so. Yes, I'm happy that he said, but I wonder if like later in the paper he says something about like, well, is the public sector responsible for that cost? Like who's going to do that work? And I mean, that's where and you were talking about waste management being privatized. That's where the industry has gone, right? Privatizing recycling. But I think in an effort to keep costs low, we haven't made the investments partially because of this aggregation problem, right? Because we don't know how much material is out there. We don't know the cost of aggregating it all. And, you know, in some material streams, we know better than others. But as you start aggregating, then you can decide, here's like the investment and the infrastructure that we need. But because it's costly to aggregate, the private industry hasn't done it. It's like they do it. It's the chicken and egg, and they've done it the other way. In things that they know that they're of value, they've started to aggregate. But we haven't done a good job of aggregating what we don't know the value of.
Exactly. Let me read this, which is, what immense sums do these homemakers pay to satisfy their quite proper desire to have clean indoors? Can we not take the soap operas outdoors and convince people that paying a fraction more for the article they use and will be buying is for cleanliness and reuse as well. It cannot be done for free, quote unquote, for our listeners.
Yeah.
Free, quote unquote, is a word that's used loosely for those things that people expect to get, which are not actually subject to the competitive pricing of supply and demand, or where the cost is real, or where the cost is actually not actually being calculated, where there's actually no real cost associated. So water, he then goes on to say, is that free thing, is that tradition that is considered to be an expected price, but not necessarily presented at the true cost. Yet food, which is even more fundamental than water, is priced accordingly to supply and demand. And so he kind of gets to that, is this illusion of pricing that we play with other things that we expect. So why can't we change our expectation? I'll then go on and say, it's essentially, he goes on to think about how we only have to think about how saturated the telephone system would have become if telephone service was included in direct payments. So the idea at the time where you were paying directly for, because of the system, the way the system was built, you were paying directly for the time. Our parents were in a reality where phone calls were expensive.
Right.
Now we live in this reality where our expectations change, so the economics changed.
Right.
And so now we just pay a monthly fee and we get unlimited call whatever we want. And so just the technology shifted along with expectations. Why can't we do the same? So it kind of gets to your point there.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like, that's the, I guess, like, the attempt at carbon pricing is to say, like, here's what it would cost, or here is the cost of this particular action, right? That's like kind of your pay per minute, is you're paying per carbon. But like, what I would be curious is, like, if you had to do the monthly subscription for the carbon that you're emitting, right? Like, you can calculate that based on your average usage, but as a globe, I'm sure we could also calculate that, and then that total cost, if you distribute it amongst weighted distribution amongst those who actually use it, what do you get?
And that would change. Yeah, that would change our sense of these unit economics. And as he then goes on to say, it would change the way that we view ownership. The next industrial revolution can only be accomplished by a radical revision of some of our economic traditions. And even more difficult, the re-education of ourselves and of our children towards a new sense of values and rewards. In one example, every one of us knows how to accept the reward for one's work, the pleasure of owning things. Yet one consequence is of the recycling and reuse that comes from owning nothing except works of art. We must get used to the idea that we are no longer consumers and there is no longer ownership. We must replace usership for ownership.
What are the chances we meet Dr. Spielhaus?
None. No chances.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Dr. Spielhaus is long gone. But I mean, it's crazy. And I'm trying to take the most enlightening part of this and not disheartening process in this, which is the fact that we were saying all this 50 years ago. And you and I are having these conversations today. And so, there's an element of that's again, trying to take the inspiration, which is we are a part of the re-education. This is what selling circular is all about, is how do we start to have more of these conversations? And luckily, it's being forced upon us to change the way that I think our economy is structured. And we'll be able to react and adapt to the societal, but then also material needs. And that's what we're here to do, is build the community associated with that. I'll read one more and then get your final reaction out of all of this, which is the next industrial revolution is generating a huge industrial effort to be the mirror image of the present industry that now takes things back to the user, the mirror image that will take them back from the user back to the manufacturer, and an industry that will be just as great as our product industry today and will not produce products. It will rather reprocess the things we call wastes so that they may be reproduced in the factories of which they came.
Wow. Can all the manufacturers read this?
Yeah, right. And
This
and
well, I was thinking this should like why isn't this part of business school 101? I mean, it's like not in the interest of business school, I think. But
yeah,
I don't know. My business school, I went to NYU and it was at Stern. I was in their undergrad program and we had a pretty, I think, robust business and its publics. That was what it was called, like a 4-year program where you learn about the role of business and stakeholders, not just shareholders. And they like made us really critically think about business relationships and Porter's 5 forces that became kind of more that like shifted to be more stakeholder oriented. And uh I think circular economy wasn't so part of that story. It was still
right.
like what are the negative externalities, and like that it kind of like stops there. Thinking about community, environment, governance, like kind of like the ESG direction. But this, like, I wish that I had heard this, 15 years ago.
Totally. Absolutely. I so agree. I'm lucky where I had a little bit of a different circular economy introduction at Arizona State.
Mm,
So I was
mhm,
doing the sustainability part, but had some mixed degree with some of the MBA students,
mm,
um, and got a little bit of an introduction to this. Not this writing though. Even that's fascinating. Where seeing that in 1971 would have been revelatory for me. Even then, would have been like, my gosh, we need to do so much more. Um, and into the maybe not so hard, but maybe hard pivot here of that's what our guest talks about today. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah,
Sarah Pinner, CEO of Beni, she got to join us through a great introduction that Sabira made, where we got to talk to her about a product that she's building that helps her users, helps the people that love the product that is Beni figure out how to buy more secondhand. Now we're still talking about ownership. That's not changing, and that's okay. But even
right.
buying secondhand is a paradigm shift away from continuing the purchasing of new. Um, and so ultimately, we had a great conversation with Sarah. What was your some of your impressions?
What I love about it is that the industry, the fashion industry. So just to explain Benny really quick, it's a uh, browser extension and an application to help you search through multiple reuse platforms that exist today in order to find a specific brand or type of item that you're looking for. And what I love about that is that the fashion industry has made it far enough that Benny is a possibility today, that there are many platforms helping people reuse with different business models, different economic foundations, and she can aggregate all that information in one place to make the user's life and decision making easier for reuse instead of me having to click through many platforms to find what I'm looking for. So that to me is very cool, like progress, at least in the fashion
What I
industry.
loved, yeah, what I loved about what you said in there was, and what immediately sparked is that feedback loop between enough consumer interest
Mm,
in the changes and adoption of secondhand,
yeah.
where more and more businesses are taking a look at this. Luckily, we've talked about it before. A lot more platforms are now engaging in the peer-to-peer exchange of those goods between users that are looking for it. That now we're starting to get, I think that cycle that Dr. Spielhaus was talking about, which is the adoption is increasing, and now we're starting to get a revolution of
Mhm.
change where more and more solutions like Benny are now being provided to consumers to make their
Yeah.
life easier to make those decisions. And so now
Yeah.
I think there's a future where this gets even more flywheel attention and more investment, and then more and more solutions will start to scale and help those efforts. And then
Totally.
the manufacturers are going to be paying very, very close attention, which they currently are. A lot of them are.
They are, yeah.
Not enough. I say a lot, actually. A few. There's a handful that
A
we can
few.
think of, but more and more will be paying attention.
Yes. And I think what's also cool from her story is that, like, she came from a business school background.
Yes.
She There is this, like, spark of an aha moment, and she gave it a try, and, like, that is the private industry trying
Yes.
to facilitate some sort of transaction, and she's playing her part, and her company is playing a part in making it easier. And that also, yeah, I from from somebody who went to business school myself, like I love that journey, and was very excited to hear about kind of her going from not really thinking about this to being all in on it.
That is probably the most fun about the industry of which we work in, which is we are seeing a need and we are rising to the value of what that need is actually providing to our economy. So we're trying to create solutions to capture
Yes.
that value, to address the needs of both the users of which we serve, but the future needs of our economy and our systems to not fail our planet and fail our social systems. So yeah, it's it's a good one. We're starting off the season hot. Please, if anything, reach out to us if you have any more questions. We can connect you with some of our entrepreneurs, and we can connect you to their websites. We don't shout it out, but if you want to check out Beni after this interview, check out joinbeni.com for their aggregating tool and get to secondhand shopping even faster. And then, as always, please subscribe and comment as you feel appropriate, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Selling Circular. Here's Sarah Pinner, CEO and founder of Beni. We would love to start by talking about the business model. Start about you and where this thought process came from, why you thought this was going to be something you really want to spend time on. We love these aha moments, the ones where you're like, I think I can do this. How did that start? Where did you sort of click in and be like, I think this is possible? And then the secondhand focus is even more relevant.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because there was definitely an aha moment around Beni, but it also came from like a number of years of just sort of immersing myself in circularity and thinking about what that means. So I started my career in food and ag, and prior to Beni, I was at Imperfect Foods. So that was obviously very waste focused and was really a conscious choice on my part. I had in the years prior really sort of wanted to dedicate my career to the problem of waste. I have a sign that says waste is a design flaw. And I just find it so interesting and fascinating to think about how we can create systems that have abundance, but also are sustainable in nature. So that's still my focus for my career. And so that was first at Imperfect. And then, there I really sort of loved the part of circularity that is sort of more around behavior change and more around making the sustainable circular solution really accessible to everybody, really attractive, understandable, things like that. And so I had that lens with me. And then I was at business school when the aha moment happened. And it was COVID. I was trying to shop secondhand online personally. And I was like, this is not very fun. And I had so many friends that would say something like, yeah, I know I should buy secondhand, but I just don't. And it was really interesting to see that gap there.
I just don't, because it's
Yeah,
hard. I just don't.
it's hard.
What did you find?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, it was just, yeah.
So we really dug into that. And the first part is like, I know I should was a deeper and more ubiquitous understanding of like, yeah, I get it. It's cheaper. It's more sustainable. There's cool stuff out there, but I'm just not interested in learning a new way of shopping. But it just feels like a crapshoot when I go on these sites and I try to find something I'm looking for, but I don't like going to a thrift store, right? So all of these things that were really about the experience of shopping secondhand, not necessarily the reality of buying something secondhand. And so that's really why we focused on the experience of shopping secondhand and thinking about, all right, there's so much inventory that's out there now, especially online, which is incredible, but it's still really inaccessible to a lot of people. There's a lot of hurdles to jump through to buy something secondhand, whereas it's really easy to buy something new. And so that's really why we started with the browser extension, which was, let's meet people where they're already shopping, understand their current behavior, and just make that switch as easy as possible.
What I love about that, and I think there's a so this is calling on my own reuse journey in shopping secondhand, I had this romanticized maybe perception of how easy it would be to find that great cool thing at Goodwill or that great next thing at whatever thrift shop. And so I did. I spent the time to go on a Saturday morning, on a Wednesday afternoon when they would get the new shipment or the new stuff in, and I would try to go. And then it just became like, okay, I've done this 3 weeks in a row and I've not found anything. And that's where this hits me. Is it's again, it's taking that and it's bringing the convenience level right to the fingertip that says, hey, if you hit this button instead of this other buy button, we can take you to that find that's going to satisfy multiple levels what you're actually looking for. So I so identify with that, because the struggle of trying to buy secondhand with then the ease combination is huge. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to give it more of a run. I was telling you all earlier, I downloaded it. I'm excited to look through the men's stuff, and so this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for you to try it out. And we're obviously always looking to grow and improve. Resale is a very interesting type of inventory to deal with. So there's always weird, magical stuff that's happening and also weird stuff that's happening. But no, exactly to your point, just hitting on that convenience factor. In ThreadUp's resale report from last year, I found the most interesting stats were twofold. One was that there is this expected growth for resale, and particularly online resale, but it's expected that 60% of that will be from new to resale shoppers. So it's really important to make it very accessible to actually realize that growth. And then the second was some research around Gen Z shoppers. And I think it's very known that they say they care about sustainability, but Shein exists, right? So everyone knows that. And one of the reasons why they say they still buy fast fashion is for convenience and affordability. And so the affordability piece is there with resale. How do we also make it just as convenient as fast fashion? And so that's really, I think, hits on that, because it takes the wind out of your sails when you're trying to do something good, you're trying to buy secondhand, and it's a bad experience. And so that's really why we're focusing on kind of the shopping experience itself.
So talk a little bit about the design of Beni and it being a plugin. And I think that for me, the interesting beauty of the plugin is you as the aggregator, because bridging brand desire with aggregation, right? That to me is the value. If I'm looking for something from Everlane, if I have to check multiple places, that's a pain in the butt for me. And I know I like stuff from Everlane. So talk a little bit about that, and then also talk about folks who actually don't know anything about the brands that they want. And do you cater to them or not?
Yeah, it's interesting. So let me share a little bit about kind of the Beni platform as it is today, and I'll kind of unwind it a little bit as to why we made this decision. So on the back end, exactly to your point, we are an aggregator. We are, as far as we know, the largest aggregator of resale in the US. So we have about over 40 marketplace partners, ranging from eBay, Poshmark, The RealReal, all the way down to smaller. We ingest all of their feeds directly. So we have a database of about 250 million listings at any one time. So a lot of products. And we do that twofold. One, we partner with them because we're an affiliate business model. So when we drive purchases, we take a percentage. And two, resale inventory is weird. And so we want to make sure we have kind of more direct access to it so we can normalize it and make it searchable and usable. So that's really the back end. Our core product that we started with, that is still our core product today, as you said, is the extension, the plugin. We also now have a searchable interface. So in the app, you can go and say, hey, I just want a black tennis shoe. And you can put that in there and you still get the benefit of the aggregation without necessarily being on the mainline site. And we found that because there are times where people are like, I don't really know. I don't really care if it's an Everlane thing, or I'm thinking secondhand first, which is great, but I still don't want to open up all these different sites. So that is something we've sort of graduated into, and kind of we have that to work together with the extension. And the extension is, primarily designed for folks who are shoppers, right? They're people who are on these mainline sites a lot. They are likely not thinking secondhand first, but we're able to tag along with them in their experience. But if they graduate into thinking secondhand first, we also have an experience for that. I think in terms of like not necessarily knowing what you're shopping for, I think we are much more like Google, I would say, than like a Pinterest or something, right? We're not saying we know what you should buy, but if you tell us what you want, we'll find it for you secondhand. But we are thinking of how we can kind of help kind of complement platforms that do that discovery. And the last thing I'll say just about the design that has been really, I would like to say it was intentional, but it was a little bit of a happy accident, was, we chose to start with the extension because we were really focused on the aspirational secondhand shoppers. So folks who are shopping on mainline sites a lot, but are not on the resale sites. The benefit of a browser extension is also that from a search perspective on resale, we have a lot of information. So we use the image and we use the text. And so we're not just using keywords, which has allowed us to have a lot more ability to actually search through the database, which is a bit of a, which has been great, to be able to have all of that rich information since there's no SKU numbers in resale.
Wait, so just to double click on that to make sure I heard to make sure I understood. You're saying that if I'm browsing Everlane's website, y'all are leveraging through the extension what you're seeing on the page as a way of search input. So you're not just using it like it's a blue pair of jeans. You're looking at like the style of the pair of jeans, and then you're matching it to whatever's in your database that may look like that.
Yeah. So we again, cool. There's no SKU numbers in resale. So we are AI powered, but we don't necessarily lead with that because we do that because it's really the only way that we can do these searches. But we use a lot of AI in order to match the attributes. So we use the product title, the image, things like that to surface the same or similar alternatives. Because a lot of times on resale, it's on a mannequin or it's a generic title, and there's a lot of refining to do, but that's gives us that ability to have more rich information that is not typically available when you're just kind of searching directly on one of the sites. And then we're thinking about how do we continue to use that type of information in the searchable site experience as well.
So you all are catching, as we were talking about, the purchasing wave a little bit of consumers that are looking for secondhand, for resale. I still imagine there's a fair amount of education involved in that as well. So you're still catching a wave of things that are growing and generations that are assuming this responsibility, but also enthusiastically. But there's a whole portion that we're still teaching, and how do you all deal with the intersection of that, where you're catering to a market that's eager for maybe a solution to help them, their purchasing go a little bit smoother in reuse and secondhand, but there's a whole nother market that we're all dedicated towards further educating. How do you all straddle that? What's really the goal here in both servicing a market and growing that whole market?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we've, exactly to your point, like our core target is these, as I said, aspirational secondhand shoppers. So they're people who are not necessarily, they're not skeptical about resale, but they're like, this is not my primary way of shopping. I'm aware of it. I would like to try it. And so it's a little bit less about educating on the fundamental benefits of it. There's some of that. And candidly, we do lean into the cost savings a lot more for those types of shoppers than the sustainability, because it is a very clear benefit. Whereas the sustainability for some folks is a little bit of that extra nudge. And for us, that's fine. That's the beauty of reducing waste, is it is cheaper and more sustainable. So there's a little bit of kind of educating around the fundamental benefits of buying something secondhand versus new. But really it's a lot, and this is something we're kind of leaning into more this year, is what I found is it's really more of a trust question for some shoppers. So it's sort of like, which platform should I go to? Like, what is this whole experience? Can I return it? Right? All of these questions. And so what we're going to start to do more of is in your kind of onboarding experience, understanding, what is your experience with resale? And if you're newer, the benefit of being a browser extension is we can kind of bring you along that journey and think a little bit more about, if we bring you to Poshmark and it's your first time, educating you a little bit, like, this is what this is, here's the caveats, because there's just a lot of information that you need to know about all of these places that it's just more and more of a hurdle. So when we think about education, we think about, that fundamental, like, this is really, you could find something really cool, but it's really about how do we bring people along the journey and help them get to a place where this is now just comfortable for them. In the same way, like e-commerce in the 90s, you kind of needed to bring people along that journey. So there's pros and cons to having a browser extension, but one of the pros is you can be with them throughout their journey. So that's something we're going to be doing more of this year.
Do you find that the extension is fairly sticky, and that there's ultimately consumers are really happy with the secondhand options, that you all are not really in charge of all the secondhand options? You guys are just, again, aggregating, but there seems to be more and more options available that then are being fed into Beni and then fed to the consumers. It seems to be really tracking.
Yeah, I would say it's a twofold question. The browser extension itself is very sticky. We have a very low churn, and browser extensions in general there's, I would say, a little bit more hurdle for folks to install them. But then once they're installed, as long as they're not incredibly annoying or dangerous or not valuable, they tend to be sticky. So that's a huge benefit. And then in terms of the actual results and the actual purchase experience, I would say, in general, we have a lot of people clicking on the results. We've really focused on getting at least relevant results as much as possible. And so we've seen a lot of activity there. And then the purchases that people are happy about, we know about, which is awesome. I will say one of the downsides of being an aggregator is if people do have a bad experience on the resale site, we don't typically know, because, for example, if you bought a flight via Expedia or Google Flights, you're not typically going to go back to Expedia and say, hey, this Delta flight was bad. And so there's a little bit of a gap in understanding there. We know anecdotally that some people may have, it doesn't get shipped to them or whatever it is, but broadly we don't hear that a lot, which might just be we don't have that information. But we are definitely seeing a lot of satisfied customers and a lot of folks who really kind of get hooked on it, which is the goal, right? Like, once you have that experience of like, this is this exact same thing, it's 50% less, and I can feel good about it, people can get pretty hooked.
What I love about what you said, and then Sabira, we try to balance our time here as we yield back and forth because we're both always so interested. What I love about that, though, is it maybe speaks to, if we were talking about aggregators and extensions, browser extensions, as of 15 years ago, maybe even, you would have gotten a type of consumer that would have looked toward Beni and been like, hey, this brand didn't fulfill my order. You need to help me. And I feel like as consumers, we've evolved, and the younger consumers that are adopting these extensions understand the service you all are providing. And so there's much more value probably to you all as a brand, because they know, oh no, Beni's helping me with this. I can go to them for this. If I have a problem with a vendor on Poshmark, I'm not going to take that up with Beni. But I feel like that's an evolution from a previous digital generation where that took a little bit of a growth and understanding of what an extension means and why it's powerful as consumers to use.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I feel like older users sometimes will say like, oh, you keep sending me emails. I'm like, that's not us, that's Poshmark, for example.
Right.
But yeah, I think that there's just much more understanding of tools like this that are sort of, e-commerce enablement or re-commerce enablement, where it's supporting your journey, it's adding to your browsing experience, but it's not in and of itself the seller. I also, we try intentionally to, as much as possible in our marketing, make it clear that like, we are a tool, we're not a marketplace, we don't intend to be a marketplace. But I do think it's partially just that there's other tools like this that exist, and so folks are more they expect that, and kind of making sure people know, like, we are not selling this thing. We are taking you to this other site. So, but yeah, it's a good point.
We are a tool. We're a tool for your use, not necessarily representing any of these merchants here. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that was going to lead me to the question. So then what is the revenue model? How do y'all get paid? How do you keep, like, what does your team look like to support all this aggregation? It sounds like it's not an easy task.
Yes. So yeah, so our business model is primarily affiliate. So we earn commission on any sales purchases that go through Beni. There's some caveats. Usually it's there's a window in which we can get attribution. So there's a lot there, but we were lucky enough to and still have advisors and folks from Honey who are very helpful to us in in getting involved in the affiliate space, understanding it, and kind of being using it to its best advantage as a business model. So that's our model right now. We have some few other pieces and some other ideas. And then in terms of, and we are VC backed, so we've raised about $5 million. And our team is about 7 full time. And it is an interesting thing because our goal is for it to feel very seamless and simple for the user, but it is a relatively hefty product to build. A lot of people say, like, why didn't this exist before? I'm like, well, let me tell you, it's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. And so, we're really focused this year. Last year was a lot of, maturing the foundation. We went from like less than 10 partners to 40, like less than 5K users to over 30. So a lot of kind of growth, foundational building, expanding the platform. And this year is a lot about growing our user base, growing that revenue, of course, and kind of understanding now that we have this foundational asset, I guess, and we have this interesting position in the space, how else can we leverage it to make resale more accessible and drive more revenue, of course.
No, go for it. For listeners, I was signaling visually that I was about to ask a question, but no, Sabira, absolutely.
So let's talk about what has been hard. I from what you said, I heard kind of two things, I think. One is the data ingestion piece, which is like, how do you get standardization? You're browsing Poshmark, the Real, the data that they're going to have is going to be different in different forms. That to me sounds hard, as well as then that AI search capability, I'm sure, is like just changing rapidly. So like, how do you keep up with what the technology is available and testing that and putting that out into hands? But yes, are those hard things? And then B, what else is hard?
I think you can also tell a little bit where we've maybe fallen in our own professional. Sabira always leaning product, and I'm always on the business side. So that tends to be where these come from.
I love it. Well, yeah, on the product side, those are definitely, I think that those were the two biggest hurdles. And I would say the biggest moat that we have at this point as well is we started pretty early on recognizing that we didn't want to try to scrape from these sites. We wanted to actually have access to this product because they have these product feeds because they are changing every day. It's weird information, and the more that we could have that kind of be able to ingest it and normalize it, the better. So that, I would say, we kind of got to a point early mid last year, where we were, we had the infrastructure built, but it took some time. For example, eBay has 100,000 different sizes that come in their feed. So it's all free text. So we have to build a model to normalize that, for example. So that took time and effort to build that foundation, but it was critical, I think, to get to even build the product. And then that search piece, it's interesting with the AI tools that exist. I mean, our North Star is, we know that we need to provide relevant alternatives. The thing that is the most, our click-through rate is the most responsive to the relevancy of the results, as you might imagine, right? And that means a lot of different things. But I think for us, we started fundamentally, using AI, but we weren't trying to say, oh, this is a cool AI technology, let's find a solution. It really was, because we have a strong North Star of what we want to accomplish, we were able to see what's the right off-the-shelf things, where do we need to build in-house. And for example, we started by using Google's product vision for the image, which was a great way to get us off the ground. But once we got to scale, we were able to bring that in-house, reduce our costs, and kind of have a little bit more flexibility. And so, we take those decisions thoughtfully, but it is interesting as, we've gone through a couple iterations of GPT, and as most people have. And so I think keeping in mind what we are trying to accomplish for the user has helped us kind of understand what are the right tools that we want to use to get there versus just saying, this is a cool technology, we should do that. Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head in terms of the product challenges. I think the only last one is just browser extensions, for example, on mobile are very new. We have a mobile iOS extension for Safari, but that is the only platform that allows for mobile extensions. And so mobile is obviously big for shopping, it's big for acquisition. And so a big part of last year was getting the mobile experience to at least to be on par with the desktop. But we're still, understanding how to path people appropriately. But for example, the last challenge I'll say is that's been a good, interesting learning is attribution tracking. So we don't own where they download and we don't own where they purchase. And so figuring out who are these people, where are they coming from, how successful are they, it has actually been very challenging. And I give mad props to our marketing team and engineering team for figuring that out. So there's just some nuances to the product type and delivery channels we've chosen, but ultimately we feel they're the right thing for the user. So that's why we've gone through that.
I loved where this took us toward what's next. There's an element of what's next with Secondhand, what's next with Beni, what's next with reuse. Where are we headed? What's your theory? Let's get, we can get wild here. I'm always down for this. We in circular economy and what Sabira and I have always tried to think about is right now, I think we're in circular economy 1.0. So we're applying the technologies we have in the business theory and use cases that we've studied toward reuse, toward secondhand. Do you have theories that you're willing to share? Where are we going forward into new re-commerce models? What are you passionate about in those theories of circular economy of the future?
Yeah. Woo. Big question.
Yeah.
I mean, I could opine a lot. I think,
I do think this. Just go. Just roll it.
Perfect. Let's go. I think I agree with you in terms of kind of circularity 1.0 in terms of, something I think before is almost like pilot circularity, right? We're building the foundation, the building blocks. Now it's sort of, what does this look like? Maybe like e-commerce, any of these things that are 1.0 where it's trying to figure out how it fits into people's lives, to existing models. And, for us, at least in terms of where we're at now and kind of hearkening back to what I was talking about with the shopping experience is we do see resale is generally accepted. It's generally available. So there's a lot of resale online, which we are very grateful for, that we are not the ones building that infrastructure. But it's not very accessible. And so it's if the experience is not good, people are not going to do it. People aren't going to jump through hoops and hurdles, and nor should they to make the right decision, the choice for them. And so I think right now we are sort of saying, okay, what is the expected experience for people, and how do we get resale and circular models to sort of meet that level? But I do think in the future, and that's going to take some time to start to get that kind of general adoption, right? And we see hopefully in the next 5 years, it's just as easy to buy something secondhand as it is new. And anything you're trying to buy online, you should have the option to buy both. And there's I think going to be a variety of ways we get there. There's brand owned resale. There's all of these. There's a lot of pieces right now, I think, in terms of how they're all going to fit together. We will see, and we want to be the connective tissue there. So I could go deeper into that, but I do think that could happen in the next couple years. I do think, like, ultimately, obviously, the vision is we need to produce less stuff. And that's why we want resale to be a bigger part. I think that is a more fundamental foundational shift in the market. And I think that understanding how brands and like the supply chains that exist today are going to how that's actually going to happen to produce less things is a question. One thing that I always think about that I would love to get to a point is helping get to a point where everyone's thinking about the things they buy as assets, right? So it's not just a thing you buy and then you get rid of. It's something you're using, unless it's food. And then there's a next step. And I think that one of the things in Beni that I would love to do in the future is like showing you, for example, what the resale value is of an item you might be buying new, so you can think of it like a net price, right? So if you buy this high quality item, you're going to be able to retain value. If you buy the fast fashion item, you're not. And so you can make that choice and just starting to show people the value and kind of embed that into the market versus trying to tell people what they should do and that it's more sustainable. So
I love that.
I could go on, but ultimately that's kind of the world we need to live in, where that's like a very common way and people are seeing themselves as users and not consumers. But
I love that.
That's going to take a lot.
Yeah, there's a provenance angle to that where I'm sure you can, well, again, various amounts of whatever data you own and don't own, that I'm sure pieces come in and out and you all may not know what same piece is, nor does eBay, nor does Poshmark, nor does any user. But still, I love that idea of an asset, because you might be able to, at some point soon, hopefully, say, hey, this is being listed at $74 on Poshmark. The odds of it being listed at $74 in the next 3 years on Poshmark are actually probably going to be the same. So net value, you actually may be able to resell this and get all of that money back because of a legacy brand or a legacy product or something that's very popular. And that's a very cool idea that you might be able to help the consumer be more educated with their own personal cash flow of their wardrobe.
And ultimately that feeds, I mean, again, this is where it starts to get into like an ideal circular economy, but hopefully that feeds back into brands and they are incentivized to produce less high quality durable items because that's what the shoppers want, because there's value in those items. And so, and there's like a fundamental understanding, like buying a car, that maybe you'll buy a higher quality car because you can resell it. And so I think that's when it starts to get into like, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do think that the more and more resale is easy to access on both sides, buying and selling, and the more and more it's integrated into the way in which we are accessing buying things, apparel and beyond, the more it'll start to kind of shift the mindset towards like, oh, actually, I don't want to buy this $20 shirt from Shein or something because it's going to fall apart.
Can you, I guess, continue to opine on what your read of digital product passports in the role of fashion has been? At least from outside, it looks like fashion has been the leader in the US, at least on digital product passports. But just curious, like your thoughts on the future of that and if it fits into Beni's thinking at all.
Yes. As a relative outsider, I obviously like know of it, but I'm not an expert. I think that when you think about this vision, it fits in. It's going to be important to have this provenance, solid data about it. I do think apparel and fashion is leading. I still think it will take quite a while for it to actually be ubiquitous. And so for us, like the better data we have, better for us. And so if we can actually get like original information on the product, that would be awesome. And if resellers have access to that, that's awesome. And we think about how could we support that, because we know that people purchase resell items that have more information and better quality information, more than just like black dress, right? Because that makes sense. So I think it's really interesting. I do think though I don't think we can wait for that to be implemented in order to start to think about how do we bring products back into the brand experience and track products and kind of figure out how we work with the data we have, I think, to make the experience better and to help shoppers access product information. So I'm really excited about it, but I think it'll take a little bit of time. I will say, I think my guess as well for why fashion might be a leader is that it's also, you can like lose the product information very easily and quickly. Whereas if you have like a camera or a tech product, there's just a lot more like ability to access information about that product. Whereas I find like one of the reasons why we started with apparel and why our next category, if we extend, would be like home goods and furniture, is because there's just like the search problem is a lot more painful. Because again, it's just like, oh, I have this black dress in my closet, I don't know what it is. So I'm excited about it, but I think it'll take some time for that to become enough of a like implemented enough to really move the needle.
And I like where your heads are at, where Beni's at. It's ultimately the bet that we're all taking here on this podcast, which is this is going to be it's a force function. It's going to have to happen as brands and consumers rethink their relationship to the stuff that they use, not necessarily consume in the same way. We're moving away from, oh, I just want this thing for this event, and then away it goes. And so ultimately, that's what we hope. And I think we're all betting here is that we're a part of that innovation, and we're a part of building that fabric to help that education continue and help the adoption continue.
Yeah.
My question, and then even then, is how did you find your teammates? This is the fun part of, I'm going through the process of starting something, and ultimately it's trying to surround myself with people that maybe see the same thing I want to see and help try to build the same thing I want to build. But that's not always an easy process. Was it an easy process for you in finding your co-founders?
Yes, it's a great question. So I will say, I talked about the aha moment. It sounds all like easy and simple. The real story is it started as a case competition at business school. I didn't intend for it to be a business. I was a very reluctant entrepreneur. I think I did not see myself as an entrepreneur for a lot of reasons that I could talk about. And so I was actually kind of trying to like convince myself like, oh, this won't work. And in the process, it ended up working. And there was a lot of serendipity with the team, the early team, that actually kind of allowed me and led to us continuing to pursue it, which I think happens, right? You put yourself out there, but there's going to be some serendipity. So with our CTO, I had met her. She worked at Appeal Sciences. So she was also a food waste nerd. And actually, my dad had connected us. I'm from Santa Barbara, and she lives in Santa Barbara. And he is the property manager at her apartment building. And like 6 years ago now, probably, he was like, hey, you guys are both food waste nerds. You should chat. We did.
That's a founder meet cute. Yeah,
it's a founder meet cute. Yeah, and we chatted. We got lunch. She was trying to basically schmooze me to get the apartment and all this stuff. And then we weren't really in touch when I got to a point with Beni where I was like, okay, the idea is there, the research is there. Theoretically, could this work? I admittedly went to my LinkedIn and typed in software engineer because I was like, I must know some smart people. She popped up and I was like, yeah, this girl, she's so cool. So reached out to her and I just asked, like, I think for me, again, I wasn't like, do you want to co-found this business? It was more like, we have this idea. Do you want to answer the next big question with us, which is, could we theoretically build this? And kind of just went from there until, we raised some money, and then she came on full time. And so that was Celine. With Kate, my other co-founder, who's the CMO, another very serendipitous story is, as part of my business school experience, there was like some entrepreneurship classes where you could work on a business. And I was kind of putting together a team for that, talking to another friend who was going to be on the team. I said, who I would really like a marketing person. I don't joke when I say, literally while we were talking, Kate, who's the co-founder, texted that friend and said, do you think Sarah is looking for people for the Beni team? And she comes from a marketing background. She launched Bud Light Seltzer. So a lot of serendipity. And I say that because part of me feels bad saying that to people, because I'm like, I truly did not control that. But I think it's something about putting yourself out there. Check on your LinkedIn, check on people, like say, I want a marketing person. And then, we have other team members, and everyone has sort of come a little bit through some serendipity, but also about putting yourself out there, surrounding yourself with people who kind of who want to kind of challenge the status quo, to not sound too cheesy, but those are our fun, meet cute stories.
I love those stories. And mostly I've been able to find that in my own business is really trying to, again, it's just putting yourself out there. And once you kind of just let it exist, I won't get too existential with it or just universal with it, but ultimately it comes back. And these connections, people talk. And so I think that's great. That's a great example that you lead, and a great wisdom for anybody else who's thinking about starting something. So
it's hard, and it's not concrete advice to just like put yourself out there. But I do think that there's always going to be some level of serendipity with investors, that with anybody. It's a weird thing to do, to bring a bunch of humans together to work on something from the ground up. So as much as I love to control everything, you do kind of have to see where things lead and just put feelers out there.
So I guess on that note, it sounds like you went through this like entrepreneurial personal discovery and faith leap jumping process. What advice do you have for those who might be interested in starting a circular oriented business to give it a go?
Yes. I would say for me, one of the reasons why I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur is I lived in the Bay Area. I think I saw like this like move fast and break things, take risks kind of thing. And I had a professor at school who's still an advisor and investor who talked a lot about like, there's a lot of risk inherently in starting something new. So it's actually, your job is kind of to try to mitigate risk and obviously try to like experiment, but like sometimes if you move fast and break things, then you just break things, right? And so just this like rethinking of that there's not one archetype of what it means to be an entrepreneur. I do think like having something I was really excited about and passionate about, and like there was other people and there was some momentum, gave me the confidence to do it, versus like just kind of saying I want to start a business and then figuring it out. Some people that works really well. I think for me it wouldn't have. So I think that's part of it. And I also think the main piece of advice that I would give people, well, the number one piece of advice I give people is to take every piece of advice with a grain of salt, because initially people will give you a lot of opinions about starting a business. And initially I would just like follow all of the pieces of advice. And then I would realize like, wait a second, you just gave me totally opposite opinions. So I would say pattern match, trust your gut. That aside, my piece of advice is one thing that I really, when we started, we weren't sort of saying, I want to start a company, because that like, what does that even mean, right? Or I want to build this product. It was more about, this is the vision for what we want to do. What's the biggest question we need to answer right now to figure out if that's possible? And really focusing on like, what is your idea of the business model and the product, and then what's those riskiest assumptions underlying them. And I think for me, it really helps us narrow down on like, what are we focusing on? What are we trying to experiment around versus like, you don't need to think about like wage comps, right? Which is like part of building a company, but that's not the time. So I think like taking it one question at a time is helpful, and bringing people along the journey who can help you answer those questions versus trying to say like, just focus jumping into like starting a company, because that's really hard to wrap your arms around.
Great pieces of advice. Sabira, I'm going to end on your question of hope. As we look towards, what are you hopeful for in the mission that we all pursue of either reuse, secondhand shopping, circularity? What are, when you're looking at the patterns, when you're looking at sort of reading the tea leaves and seeing as we're evolving as a consumer class, what's hopeful? What do you see out there that you wake up and think, okay, I'm in the right direction. We're all moving in the right direction.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think with, like I said, with the waste is a design flaw thing, like I think that there's just so many opportunities to be really creative and think about like, you don't need to go live in a bunker and wear a burlap sack to be sustainable. And I hope we don't get to that point, right? Like my goal is to be like, let's change things before we must do things like that. And I think a lot of people say this, but like if you look at nature, there is so much abundance, and the growth is good because fundamentally what is growing is good. And so that always gets me energized to think about, okay, like what is the actual goal? Like people buy and wear clothes for a lot of psychological reasons, right? And that's fine. Like those are real, totally valid reasons. How do we address those needs in a way that is not harmful and makes us all feel good? And so that, I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that. I think with resale in particular, this was a couple of years ago, but there was a McKinsey and I think global fashion report that looked at, by 2030, I think, which is getting close, 1 in 5 garments need to be traded through circular business models if we were to have, or were to keep to the 1.5 degree pathway. So might not get there, but 1 in 5 is a very attainable thing. And I think about that a lot and communicate that to a lot of people, because I think that we are very much about progress over perfection, and you don't need to buy everything secondhand to have a big impact. And so seeing the users who come to Beni and they buy their first thing resale and they see that magic of giving something a new home, really kind of gives me hope. And I think that there's the infrastructure in place now to really make that a scalable thing and get it to where a good chunk of the things that are going around in the market are not new, and not going to landfill. So that gives me a lot of hope to see people trying new things. And so I think we can get there. 1 in 5, that's not that bad.
Yeah, we could do that. I like that. That's very positive. We got to hit 20%. That's and then we're changing the world at 20%.
Exactly.
No big deal.
Sarah, thank you for your time today. Again, enlightening, helpful for all of us to see this in action and to keep hearing about how we keep reaching for 20%. So that's not a bad message to end on.
Yeah, well, thank you both for having me and for pursuing this and for getting the word out, because of course it's an important thing and it's a great vision for the world.
We're trying to build this community. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.